Hey, it's 2.1, Introduction to Margaret Atwood and the Handmaid's Tale. Our objective: students will be able to read and analyze pages 3 to 40. Welcome to the unit. Margaret Atwood is arguably the most famous living literary novelist in the world, and arguably one of the most prolific. In the half century that she has been writing, she has published, on average, a book a year. She's won the Booker Award twice, in 2000 for The Blind Assassin and in 2019 for The Testaments, which is a spin-off of The Handmaid's Tale. She has written in every literary genre, from poetry to sci-fi to mystery. She also has a huge social media presence with 2 million plus followers on X, formerly known as Twitter. Margaret Atwood is the most prominent contemporary Canadian writer, best known for her novels. The thing that I respect the most about Margaret Atwood is how she can still be so relevant to us now as an octogenarian in her 80s with all of these followers on social media and still telling it like it is. She keeps it real. This is my favorite image of Margaret Atwood. This was from 2022, and Random House made an unburnable copy of The Handmaid's Tale, which is one of the most frequently banned books in our country, and gave Margaret Atwood a blowtorch. And here she is attempting to burn it. It, in fact, did not burn. It was unburnable. She wrote The Handmaid's Tale in 1984. It was published in 1985 as an homage to the most famous dystopian novel in the literary canon, which is 1984 by George Orwell. And it was an immediate bestseller. It was on the bestseller list for weeks. Then it came out in paperback and was once again on the bestseller list for weeks. Then a film version came out in 1990, and it was on the bestseller list for weeks. And then in 2017, the Hulu series came out, and it was on the bestseller list again for weeks. The final time it made the bestseller list was in 2022, when the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade. So the book continues to be very relevant, very well read. Chances are you know someone who has read it. You've seen an episode. You've heard of the book before. It is quite popular, especially for a literary text, right? Something that is being written about by the scholarly academians and taught in colleges and universities. So it's an important book in our time, and I'm really grateful that we get to read it in here. Let's talk about its genre. The book is a dystopian novel. A dystopian, you don't have to write the whole thing down. You can put it in your own words. I bold-faced some important words here. Is a futuristic imagined universe in which oppressive societal control and the illusion of a perfect society are maintained through corporate, bureaucratic, technological, moral, or totalitarian control. Dystopias, through an exaggerated worst-case scenario, make a criticism about a current trend, societal norm, or political system. And dystopias have certain criteria in common. Propaganda is used to control the citizens of the society. Information, independent thought, and freedom are all restricted in the society. Citizens are perceived to be under constant surveillance in a dystopian society. Citizens live in a dehumanized state. Citizens conform to uniform expectations. And the society is an illusion of a perfect utopian world. But of course it's not. It instead is this exaggerated worst-case scenario of something that's already happening in our world that the author is criticizing. So when the book makes you mad, which it will, especially if you're a woman, I believe, you'll have to remind yourself that the reason Atwood is doing that is to criticize something about our world. And let's talk a little bit about this larger umbrella genre of speculative fiction. The definition is an encompassing genre, or an umbrella term, umbrella genre, that freely explores possibility and impossibility alike. You can think of it as, focused on this word speculation. It's imagining what would happen if, okay? And so other genres might be covered under this larger umbrella genre, like historical, fantasy, science fiction, horror. Atwood made the point often, and still does, that her book is not science fiction, though. Because everything in the book, and she gave herself this rule as she was writing it in 1984, as an homage to a certain extent to George Orwell's book of the same name. This was her rule that she gave herself. Nothing in the book nothing could be included in the book if it hadn't already happened somewhere, someplace else. And so nothing in the book is purely imagined. It's all based on real historical things that have actually occurred. She says she wrote the book, first of all, because she spent a lot of time studying 17th century Puritan theocracy. In a 2017 interview linked in the video, Atwood explains that her inspiration was first because of all the time that she spent studying the 17th century American Puritan theocracy based in New England when she was studying at Harvard. She even traced some genealogy that she had that went all the way back to some of the witch trials. Think, the Crucible, right? And the Salem witch trials of the 1600s. That's what we're talking about when we're talking about the 17th century Puritan theocracy. And she says, it's important to remember that our country was actually first founded as a theocracy, not a republic, but as a country where church and the state were one and the same. And she says that this aspect of our country keeps bubbling up in our culture year after year after year. It's still around, and she wanted to remind folks of that. The second reason is she enjoyed reading dystopian novels, but noticed that all of them had male narrators. And so she wondered what it would be like to write one from a woman's voice. And like I said, she was writing it in 1984, thinking of George Orwell's book of the same name. She wanted to try it herself, but try something different, where it's a story told by a woman about women. The third reason was she'd noticed that people in the 1980s were saying what they would do if they rose to power, and she took note of these statements and clipped them from magazines and newspapers. She was concerned about what they were saying they would do, specifically when it came to women's rights and taking those away. She also notes in this interview that was in 2017 that faction that she was worried about in the 80s was now in power in the U.S. And now, as I'm making this video in 2025, that faction again is in power in our society. The world that she imagines is called Gilead, and it's a right-wing theocratic coup that has put these people into power. It's in the early 21st century, and the U.S. Is run by this elite who are alarmed by a precipitous decline in birth rates. So they've masterminded the murder of the president and a massacre in Congress, then played on public fear, ignorance, and restricted access to information and money to suspend all civil rights. A frightened, confused citizenry has hunkered down to ride out the crisis, and most have submitted to the rapid imposition of many restrictions and a rigid codification of status and role in the new dystopian state of Gilead. The story itself takes place in New England, probably Boston, but we don't hear those city or state names anymore. We do hear, however, about Gilead. Our main character, Offred, has, first of all, it's important to understand what's happened to women before I talk about Offred specifically. Women are stripped of jobs and financial independence and forced into one of 8 color-coded categories. So I'm going to look at 4 of them in this video because they're the 4 that are the most important and the 4 that come up in the first reading. The first is the wives of the elite men who run Gilead, who are called commanders. There are, the wives wear blue. Then there are aunts. Aunts are responsible for indoctrinating the handmaids in this transition generation where people had lives prior to Gilead that were much different. So aunts are really there to teach the handmaids what their role will now be in this new society and how to be successful. So we'll hear specifically about Aunt Lydia and some other aunts in the Red Center, where Offred, our main character, spent time before she became a handmaid. Then there are also Marthas. Marthas are servants, and we have Rita and Cora in our text, who are both Marthas. The final of the 4 that I'm going to discuss in this video are the handmaids. Offred is a handmaid. So we've got here a picture from the Hulu series. Here's Offred with her companion, Offglen, and a close-up of Offred. Offred had a life before Gilead, and what you'll find as you're reading is that she has to try to forget that life in order to survive in her new life as a handmaid in Gilead. But it's impossible to completely separate the two. And so you'll hear some about what happened before, some thoughts she's having now and memories about the past, and then what's happening now. And they'll all sort of be combined. So do your best to try to keep those separated so that you can follow along with what's happening to Offred, what happened to her before, and then see what happens to her eventually as we continue in the book. Welcome to The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood. I hope you enjoy the first 40 pages.